Hello, everybody, and welcome to the February 28th, 2023 iteration of the Kubernetes SIG-Windows community meeting. As always, these meetings are recorded and uploaded to YouTube, so be sure to adhere to the CNCF code of conduct. For anybody who's new here, that pretty much just boils down to be a nice person to everybody. I will start with some of the announcements and move on. First announcement is code freeze is March 14th, which is in exactly 2 weeks from today. I think like one of the biggest things that we're tracking is probably your enhancements our event. I don't know if that's still going to be on track to make it or if we're even going to be able to get reviews, but
it's become easier now in some ways because we only need kubelet changes, because apparently this is the thing that I didn't fully understand during the SIG-Arch call. I don't know whether you got that, Mark, is like they don't even want the kubectl changes. They want all the kubectl changes into like a plugin or something like that, which I can write after the code freeze event. So I'm just focusing now on the kubelet changes.
Oh, I wasn't sure if there was a place to put all of the plugins, or if they like, do we need to make a new SIG subproject that contains a plugin, or?
I have no idea.
Okay, yeah, I think we'll need to discuss that. I didn't realize that wasn't going to be needed as part of the initial merge, though, so that's good.
Yeah, I don't think it's needed as an initial merge, but I came away from the SIG-Arch call like not 100% sure whether the kubectl changes were needed or not. But so I just threw it in there, and both Mache and Jordan said no, you shouldn't do any kubectl changes. We don't want this exposed in any ways through official means. So I'll drop those changes, but he's asked me for a bunch of other changes that I hopefully can make. But my aim is still to get this in for this release.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, let us know once you get it out. And then another announcement is so the kind of lazy consensus period ended for the decision to promote Arvin to SIG-Windows co-chair. So today, so we'll be kind of merging all of those PRs and getting that done. I think that was announced about 2 weeks ago at the community meeting. So anybody who's interested in that who didn't get that, feel free to watch the recording. And yeah, thank you for all, once again, Arvin, for everything, and happy to have you.
Thank you, folks.
Taking up a little bit bigger of a role. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to announce? No, okay, doesn't seem like it. So next is sometimes we give space if there's any new contributors who just want to say hi or introduce themselves. I see at least one, but I think they're going to be giving a demo later. So you want to do that introduction, then that's fine, but go ahead now.
I'm happy to introduce myself at the start of the demo.
Okay. Pretty sure everybody else is already from the demo. All right, let's get into the agenda. So yeah, I guess, do you want, let me stop sharing, because I'm guessing you're going to be screen sharing, and go ahead. And
yes, I will be screen sharing. Just a moment. All right. So let me just get this working. Hopefully this works. Cool. Can you see, can everyone see that? Sweet. Cool. So for some context, first of all, my name's June. I've been working on a little tool called RKM for about a week and a half because I was trying to set up Kubernetes on Windows, and it was quite difficult. And I wanted to simplify the whole thing. And so basically, I've got it to a point now where it sets up, it can set up a Linux controller, a Linux worker node, a Windows worker node. And I was speaking with Jay a little earlier in the week about whether or not this tool could be used for entirely Windows setup by running the Linux bits on WSL. Now, I'm going to show a quick demo. I have been fixing bugs in this for the last 6 hours. So whether or not the demo gods are going to shine on us today is still to be seen. But basically, I've just got a build of RKM here. This is just a server. It's just running in the other room. It's not a virtual machine, so this could easily be someone's laptop or whatever you want. Now, the normal way to run RKM is it would install itself as a background service, and it would just kind of continuously run the background, set up Kubernetes, blah, 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 blah. Unfortunately, something I found out tonight is that WSL really doesn't like it if you're running a system. So I'm going to have to run this as the local administrator instead. It's basically the same. The only thing that doesn't work when you do that is that host processors can't run a system because the administrator can't elevate to that. So that's something that needs to kind of get fixed eventually. The other thing that currently was working but isn't working right now is the Windows pods can't seem to send TCP traffic to Linux pods. I did fix the DNS issue where they weren't able to resolve DNS, but now it seems like TCP is playing up. So anyway, this whole thing's very experimental, but hopefully it gives you an idea of where this could go in the future with a bit more work. So I'm just going to run the RKM in controller mode, and I'm mostly running it as administrator, which is just what the -- service does. Now, by default, RKM, when it starts up, it'll do auto discovery on the local network to see if there's already a Kubernetes master running. And that's how it decides, am I going to start a new master or am I going to join an existing cluster? And so if we start this, it's going to do a bunch of stuff, including create a virtual switch. So we're going to lose connectivity for just a moment here. And then it will, once this RDP comes back, it'll basically be downloading all of the assets, setting up all the components, starting everything up. And then hopefully we'll be able to get to kubectl in a very short period of time. All right, sweet. Yeah, so the first thing it's doing right now is it's going to download the WSL Ubuntu image. This is going to take a hot minute, but it basically, the way that RKM works to make it really easy to basically throw away everything and start from scratch is that everything gets put into a unique installation directory. Hopefully you can see this. Well, everything gets put into its own unique installation directory that is generated when there is no active installation. So it checks for this active file. If that doesn't exist, it'll go, cool, I'm going to set up a new installation for you. It's a unique path. And this is really useful for making sure that, like, if you've ever had to like tear down the Kubernetes like install and it's like containers are using files and there's file locks all over the place, right? By having a unique install path, you can always just delete the active file. And then when you run RKM again, you'll get a brand new install folder. You're not going to run into any file locks. It also means it's super easy to uninstall because it's literally stop the service and delete this folder. And that'll delete everything. It'll delete all the containers, all the state, everything. You can reset to scratch. So that's pretty nice in terms of like repeatability. And now we're just waiting for stuff to download at this point.
So when June showed me this, I was like, okay, this kind of turns the whole SIG-Windows DevTools thing on its head, because we're like, well, we were building VMs for that sort of ephemeral thing, but like this gives you a completely local development environment that's Windows native, when you don't have to delete anything. I mean, I just like it. I'm still making my head spin that you could do this. It's really cool.
Yeah, this is very, very cool. Especially June, you said what, you've been working on this for 2 weeks?
Yeah, about that.
That's pretty amazing.
Well, I started trying to set up Kubernetes with RKE2. And then because I'm running Windows 11 nodes, I found out quickly that containerd does not do the version check properly. So I was like, okay, I want to patch containerd, but then trying to get a patch containerd into RKE2, and then that was horrible. And then trying to uninstall RKE2, and it was like, I'm going to delete your C drive, and I'm like, that's not great. So that's also another reason why I went for this like completely isolated directory installation, because I wanted to make sure that it was super easy to get rid of stuff very safely.
So one question, or a few questions while stuff is happening in the background, June, is the Kubernetes binaries, you're just using whatever kubeadm is basically picking up, right?
So this doesn't use kubeadm at all. This is literally doing it from scratch. So it is downloading all the individual components, like the kube API server, all the kubelet, everything is being set up from scratch.
So you're having basically your own sort of deployment methodology to get the cluster up and running.
Yeah, pretty much. And this is also why it doesn't need to use tokens or anything like that, because that's just a kubeadm thing. I was saying this to Jay the other day, is you can just, as long as you have the certs, everything just works. So it does. So RKM does all the certificate provisioning, it does all of the kubeconfig generation. It runs containerd, it sets up the network, it sets up, it installs Calico, it does all of that work to get everything running. So
yeah, my mind is immediately going to, how can I do my development on this? Right. So a lot of us, we make changes to the kubelet, sometimes to the API server, and then we always kind of have our own way of, testing all of that, all of those changes. So I was just trying to figure out, okay, is that a way I can inject my own binaries or inject my own locally built stuff?
So while that's going on, I'll show you roughly how this is kind of structured. So basically internally, it has a bunch of components, and the components are responsible for running each of the processes and just kind of controlling when things exactly start up, because they obviously have interdependencies. But you can see stuff like, for example, this is the kubelet component, which will run on Windows or Linux. It's fairly simple. It's basically just extracting a config file and filling some stuff in, and then it's literally just running the kubelet process. So you can pretty much imagine, like, you could replace this fairly easily with go run, for example, or whatever you wanted to just run the kubelet from like your source code. And then it'll be using your own version of it. And there's a bunch of other components in here, that handle everything. So as I mentioned, provisioning, certificate setup, ECD, all that sort of stuff is handled as components. Cool. So this looks like it's going. We can see we've got containerd doing stuff, and there's a bit of kube proxy in there as well. So fingers crossed. We can go into so we're going to an install directory, which I think is going to be this one, because it's the high. This number here that's in the install directory is just the number of ticks or the number of nanoseconds, like UTC time. So it's just a unique ID. If we go, so kubectl, let me make this really big. Git nodes wide. Cool. So we can see that we have both nodes ready. We have the Windows 10 or Windows 11. It's labeled as Windows 10, but it's the Windows side of things. We also have the WSL kubelet, which is running as Ubuntu, and we can see it's running the WSL kernel and all that jazz. Let's go have a look at some pods. All namespaces. Cool. So that's still setting up stuff. I don't know why this is wrapping weirdly. Let me just open a new command prompt. I have things. Cool. There we go. All right. Cool. So now we can see the pods as the core set of stuff comes up. Calico and core DNS. Basically, it's just downloading images. And so at this point, at this point we have ECD, the API server, the kubelet and kube proxy all running in WSL. Then there's also the kubelet, core DNS, kube proxy, and a few other bits and pieces all running on Windows. It's talking, they're basically, the way this also basically sets up WSL2 to run as just like it just runs off the external switch. So WSL2 has its own IP address on the local network. And then it's just doing Calico VXLAN overlay network to do all of its communication. With regard to at the moment, we don't have TCP working between the Windows pods and the Linux pods. And I'm suspecting that's something to do with how the switches, the Hyper-V switch is doing routing and stuff. I had to use quite a few undocumented commands to get the WSL to even be able to access the network through the external switch that the overlay network is also on. But whatever issue is there, it's specific to running in this mode, because I do have my actual network that I actually run, or my actual cluster that I actually run, has a separate Linux. It runs the Linux controller on a separate machine. It has a bunch of Windows machines that are just worker nodes, and all the internet connectivity works fine there. So it's It's something specific to do with running an overlay network and WSL2 off the same Hyper-V switch. That is
And it's maybe a VXLAN thing between the Linux and the Windows.
Yeah, it could be any number of things. I found the very undocumented VFP control command that is not explained anywhere on the internet. So it's quite possible that there's just like policies or something that are missing. Anyway, if we look at, okay, everything's up. So let's go and make some pods. So kubectl apply. That's not the actual file I want. Cool. So now we've got, so basically I'm just creating Nginx and PowerShell Nano container so we can see pods coming up on both the Windows and Linux side of things. This will take a minute to basically do stuff, but as I mentioned, it basically, it all works just with the exception of whatever networking stuff's going on right now. And yeah.
So yeah, I mean, this very well could be our solution to a Windows Kubernetes development environment that sort of anyone can run, because I think it's fair to ask anybody contributing. I mean, I think it's reasonable to say that if folks want to contribute, having a Windows laptop is a pretty low bar, I think.
I mean, I wouldn't say a Windows laptop, right? I assuming you could do this inside a Windows VM.
You could if you had nested nested virtualization, just because WSL2 requires virtualization. It is technically like a Linux VM in there, but it's all managed by Windows, so it's completely transparent. So I don't really count it as a VM when given how it works.
So you're suggesting, Arvind, we have a thing that's like you're on another AMD 64 machine, and what do you do nested virtualization with? Like,
no, what you do is so I'm on my Linux laptop, right? I bring up KVM, I turn on nested virtualization, bring up a Windows VM, and then run, sorry, Joe, this is RKE, right?
RKM.
RKM.
RKE is Rancher.
Yeah. I definitely didn't pick this name thinking, oh, wow.
Can we make a new name for this? All right, go on. Yeah.
And so I would run RKM inside that VM.
You could do that if you want, and it should theoretically come up perfectly fine.
Yeah, that's what
you do your own control plane, and you just run RKM to join to it.
No, everything is being done by RKM, right? So I would
the control plane's in the WSL environment.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We just
and you need
RKM
the nested
on Linux. Yeah.
You just need the nested for WSL2.
Yeah, just because Windows runs the Linux kernel part inside Hyper-V.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm guessing this would even work on like Windows Server 2022.
It should. I haven't tested on Windows. It can. I get the feeling the feature install, because this will install all the required features for you and everything. So it will install Windows containers and WSL2. And
can you run WSL on Windows Server 2022?
Pretty
I
sure.
felt like I couldn't do anything normal on Windows Server 2022 when I tried to use it once.
Well, so I know that you probably can't get to the Microsoft Store, but it doesn't actually matter because this is setting up WSL2 manually. This is actually downloading the Ubuntu zip and then basically doing the setup of WSL itself. So if I just actually this here is the Windows pod. But if I look in the distribution list, you can actually see it sets up its own distribution. So it's actually separate from any WSL distributions that the user has on their machine. And again, this means that each of the installs is completely separate, because each of these distributions here is actually inside. I believe it's inside Ubuntu WSL. Yeah, it's set up inside here. So again, if you delete this folder, you're deleting that WSL distribution and clearing out all of the Linux state as well when you switch to a different distribution. So.
Okay, so WSL. So the only thing you really need on that machine is Hyper-V, I guess, because WSL uses Hyper-V under the hood.
Well, yeah, it'll install the virtualization component if needed as
Mhm.
well.
And so that's a generic component you can put on Windows Server. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, anyway, that's pretty much the end of the demo. So I'm just going to stop sharing. But if anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to answer any further questions people have. All right. Well, that's me done. So
Thanks. That's awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
this
really
is
cool.
awesome.
Yeah, really nice to see you got that set up so quickly too.
Yeah, I mean, I have no questions because this is the second time I've seen this, and I'm just trying to. The question I have is for us, more broader. Like, we should. This seems like it. You know, it seems like after a few months we could start adopting this. I mean, June's open to donating this to us, and it seems like if we had somebody who wanted to sort of adopt this for our workflow, like what Arvin is saying, this could be our development workflow. This could be SIG-Windows DevTools 2, or this could be its own thing, and we could deprecate the old SIG-Windows DevTools, and we could say, if you want to add a feature to Windows, here's the development environment. Go pay $100 for Windows, put it on some shitty old laptop, and just go. Like I think it would be work because none of us are .NET programmers, and none of us.
Can you speak for yourself about the .NET program?
I mean, you could. I can even see. Theoretically, we could even run this on a Linux laptop by running .NET Core on Linux. But
well, actually, it already runs on Linux because it actually makes Linux. It makes Linux binaries from the publish step, and so I run it on Linux already to do the Linux control plane for my own cluster because it will set up a Linux control plane or a Linux worker. Yeah, it works on both platforms for both roles.
But you need a Windows machine either way. Like if you're doing it, it's doing the WSL.
If you want to run the Windows kubelet, you need a Windows machine either way. I'm saying that.
And that's the thing we need.
Yeah, I have a feeling, Jay, that we could get away with running all of this inside a VM. But I see your point about, given that it's .NET, and how many of us know .NET here? Maybe Mark and James. Outside of that, outside of two of them, I don't know. Like I looked at June's code and I was like, okay, I need to learn. Is it C#, June?
Yeah, it's C#.
Yeah, I was like, oh, this might be a reason to learn C# now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, sure. I mean, we could run it different ways, but I think the table stakes here is Windows laptop. I mean, here's the thing that we know works. You have a Windows laptop, you've got WSL2, you let this thing go and do the weird WSL2 runs directly plugged into your router thing that June's got in here, and then the work for us is putting in the compilation steps that we have in SIG-Windows DevTools into here, which isn't a lot of work, but it's somebody at least digging in and figuring out exactly what we need to swap out in the different .NET or C#. It's like the same thing to me because I don't know the difference. To find out those component files that June's got and say like, okay, how do we need to change this? What do we do for this? Putting some logic in there. And then we could say, okay, you got a Windows laptop, you can run this. And then somebody smart comes along and says, well, you could also do nested virtualization and run it. Or maybe we start with the nested virtualization workflow. I just feel like that's a harder one to document because it's going to be totally different on different system machines, and I still don't know what our Mac users are going to do. You know what I mean? Like it's like
I'm almost reached the stage where I feel like if you're running on those latest and greatest Macs, it's just a hard bridge to cross at this point.
Yeah, which is why I say like we might as well tell people to get a Windows laptop because most of the people who come here are probably going to.
Yeah, like I don't want to make that statement, right? Go get a laptop, like Windows instance of some sort.
Yeah.
We can make it work with nested virtualization.
Yeah.
And the other question I was going to ask June was, one thing, like you were showing me the spots where you're saying this is where you go and get your kubelet from. Maybe we could make that configurable to point at like a local file system where we have the kubelet. So Jay, we don't even need to figure out how do we build kubelet and things like that as part of this, but the user or the developer goes and builds kubelet and just points RKM at the output directory.
Yeah, that's fairly simple to do.
And
I still think we want that local cluster up experience. That's
no. It'll be local.
That's the thing we want.
But you
right?
just build it locally. You build
No,
your
like that hack local up cluster script that you can run and it literally does everything. It compiles and.
Well, yeah, that's I think like really nice.
Yeah, because we can all manually do stuff in steps, right? Like we've all done that before, right? We've compiled a kubelet and spun up a VM and dragged one thing to another, right? Like that's.
I see your point. You're
Like
saying equivalent of like when June does the command that was running, it would also build instead of just pulling from wherever the upstream binaries are.
Yeah, or point at a branch, right? Like that's what we have in DevTools now, right? You point at a branch and it spins the thing up. So we want to keep that, right? Like that's
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's a good
that's
point.
the thing. Yeah. That is the only thing that we offer over somebody just being smart enough to compile something and drag it into a VM, right?
That's a good point.
But either way, we could do this and yeah.
Do you have the context of what we're talking about for all of this too? I know Drew came with trying to get her thing set up, but do you want to maybe step back and explain some of the motivations for the SIG-Windows DevTools at the beginning, like overall? And,
yeah, so
and the current problems that we were discussing before the solution came in.
Yeah, so some of this we talked about last week, June,
Okay.
but like, our problem is, or we talked about this Sunday, I guess, June, but some of it is like, we just, right now in Kubernetes, people developing features for Linux can go and they can run one command. It's called like kind build node image. And that uses kind, which is a thing called Kubernetes and Docker. You may have heard of it or used it. And it literally, that thing goes and it just spins up a new cluster from the code that you just wrote. You can change the kubelet, you can change the kube proxy, you can change the API server, you can add a new flag to the Kubernetes controller manager, you can change anything in the Kubernetes code base, run one command, and get a cluster. So we built this this mediocre version of that called SIG-Windows DevTools that like is a vagrant recipe, and you can create a branch, and then you can do make all, and it'll spin up 2 VMs, and it'll smash the changes you made into those VMs, and it takes 2 hours or whatever, an hour to get it up and running, but at least it's just a click of a button, right? And then this is like but the problem is that all our users can't do that, right? Like it works on a Mac if you have an AMD 64 Mac, which they don't make anymore. So like it was great a while ago when everybody had AMD 64 Macs, and then Arvind came along and he had an AMD 64 Linux machine, and he had to do a couple of cartwheels to get it working on his systems. And then now we got people with M2 and M1 Macs, and that's one group of people. But we've also got Windows users that can't use it, and the Linux experience isn't really that great. So we're like, we've got to give people something other than this VirtualBox Macintosh centric experience, and we haven't been able to figure it out yet. We tried QEMU, that seems to be hobbling along. We're getting closer, but this kind of just disrupts our entire thinking to the point where if you have I'll say Windows machine, even though for me, the thing that makes sense from a developer perspective is a laptop. If you have a Windows machine, you can develop with this tool. Like you could just use this tool, write some code and develop. And we could give people a Google Doc that's 2 pages long. Make your change in Kubernetes, git clone RKE, run this shell script wrapper or RKM, run this shell script wrapper to it, and here you go, right? And so that's where we're thinking of this like end to end. How could we use this to give people a unified development experience for similar to what people have for Linux on Kubernetes, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, and then the other half of people, I think, just do spin up clusters in a cloud provider. So we're really trying to have a local story for people who don't have like sponsored cloud accounts.
Yeah, and that's part of the problem, right? Is most of the people who work on Kubernetes a lot work at a cloud company, and so they all have cloud accounts, and so there's very few people like you, June, who've built these tools to run in your house, right? Like, like we've never had somebody who really has this problem to put all that work into it. So yeah.
James?
So I think it's just gift wrapping around what you've built, though. I think it's not easy because we all have to learn this new way of thinking, but it's not, you know.
Yeah, I think James has his hand up. Do you want to go, James?
Sure. Yeah, I would just also add, a couple of years ago, I had a conversation with some of the SIG testing folks, and one of the things they want to do for Kubernetes CI for like a new PR and things is to be able to, and the reason they built Kind was to be able to build this thing quickly on a local machine and then be able to make testing really fast in the cloud or for CI. And one of the things we wanted to do is take SIG-Windows and have it as part of like the CI build or as a PR test run. We do have that, but it's optional right now because it takes so long and it requires a cloud and it's not easy for local developers to do this. Now, with what you just presented, we could potentially do that type of thing on a Windows Server 2022 VM, and they would be able to, anybody would be able to replicate that locally as long as they had some VM with Windows on it. And so that opens the door again to being able to potentially get Windows CI long-term as part of PR submits, pre-submits. So I think there's quite a bit of potential here. We just need some folks to lead it and move it forward. So awesome work.
And I checked in WSL, at least the command is available on Windows Server 2019 and 2022 as of last June. So
Yeah, I'm pretty sure WSL works on those things. It's just that you don't have the Windows store. You've got to install it manually. But RKM already does that. So
Okay, so you're there to help and mentor people, June, right? If we can find someone, like, you're not going anywhere in the next 6 months. Or
no,
at
I'm not
least-
going anywhere in this next 6 months. But that is a good point to raise some context. Like, I built this tool primarily to solve my problem internally in my business, right? Which is I need to run a Linux master and a bunch of Windows worker nodes. Like, I don't have the, I need to run the whole thing on Windows. I don't have that use case, right? So in terms of my daily experience is not going to be using that workflow. I mainly did it because we talked about it and it was like, can we actually do this? Yeah, I think it's viable. Let's explore it and see if it will work. So longer term, SIG-Windows definitely needs to have somebody who's capable of building upon it and developing it, because it's just purely from a business standpoint. Now that my problem now that my use case is solved, I don't have really any development time to kind of go in and be like, right, I'm going to take this for another 3 months and improve upon it. Like, I don't have that time capacity. So it does need to be, in order for it to make that transition from where it is now to being a useful tool for SIG-Windows, there is going to have to be somebody who basically takes over the development of it, or ports it, or transfers it, or however it makes sense to fit it in, because I won't be there to do the actual development. I'm more than happy to point people in the right direction and be like, this is how this works, so that people can get across how it works. But in terms of the actual development, that's not something that I'm going to be able to have time for moving forward. So
Of course, yeah.
And Jay, I'm also wondering, it sounds like the Linux, like the control plane stuff that's running is also set up all manually. I'm wondering if we want to take kind of the overall approach of this, where we have the Windows machine spinning up the WSL instance and then running things in there, and then actually just run Kind in the WSL instance. Just less maintenance as, Kubernetes, like new features get added and like setup changes over the course of just the project.
That's a good point, Mark. That's a good point. Like, you try and use Kind and then you kind of meld in the Windows stuff that's there in RKM to run the Windows kubelet.
Mm-hmm.
Just depends on what's easier, I guess, right? But yeah, Kind is always a nice, Yeah.
Which is, I feel like that would eliminate one class of problems, or just set of maintenance, and we could focus on.
I just
and,
wonder
like, the Windows
what
components.
happens if you have Kine and then you've got Docker. You've got 3 levels of networks now. You've got that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna say that's probably. I'm just thinking about it, like the level
Yeah.
of networks there and how many network problems already present in this solution. I'd say maybe not.
I kind of like. I like that it's just. I like how dumb it is that it just
That's flat.
runs the process as a process, right? Like,
Yeah, it's also really like one thing that I found doing or building this thing was like getting a real understanding of how all the pieces fit together, which can sometimes be very difficult when it's like there's 20 layers of scripts that are all calling from different places, and it's like I don't know what's going on. Whereas this is very straightforward in the sense it's like it runs a process, and here's the arguments, and that's what it does. So yeah.
Yeah, and doing this June has like decompiled a lot of assumptions we all have about kubeadm and other things. Like that UDP broadcast thing is. I love that. There's no, you're not passing tokens around and stuff like that. Join tokens, like we all just kind of, yeah. It's way simpler than what we're used to. Okay, so we have to find someone to yeah. I mean, part of me wonders whether I should just drop everything else and see if I can get this working, but I have so many other, we're trying to get more contributors to help at the same time, and I'm like, yeah, okay. Well, if anybody knows, here's another new project.
Add it to the list, right?
Yeah, put it on the list.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I think we're a bit over time, and yeah, thank you, Tune. I think this was very interesting for everybody to share, or everybody to see.
That's good.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, please check back in with us. Please please come hang out with us. We meet at this time every week, so if this, we'd love to have you.
I probably
Part of
will
our
not be
little-
making a whole lot of meetings, these meetings, because it's currently 5 a.m. where I am because I'm in Melbourne.
Oh wow.
So I will be around in the Slack, but I probably will not be in a lot of these Zoom meetings just because of the time zone thing. So yeah, but I'll be around.
Well, okay.
All right. I'm going to stop the recording now. Thank you, everybody, for attending.
I have to drop, but I will